In answer to your question, session time to start now. 3 till 5 o'clock. It is 3 o'clock UK time, so we are a go. Hello, my esteemed everybody. Okay then, welcome to class number 1 of the F8 Audit and Assurance live online course. I say class number 1, but as hopefully all of you are aware, we are running each of the classes 3 times per day. So a lunchtime show that I finished about an hour ago, a matinee performance in the afternoon, and a third one in the evening from 6:30 till 8:30, all UK time. The logic of this exercise is to try and make sure that there is a slot live available wherever you are in the world that fits in with your daily routine, and hopefully everyone therefore gets looked after. Slightly bizarrely, in the first session today that I thought would just be full of people from Singapore and China, because of the time difference, we had people from all over, so I guess different people have different needs, so hopefully there's a slot for you. And please feel free to use whichever of the slots works on any given day. Just to confirm, I will be aiming to do as precisely as possible exactly the same stuff in the class 3 times over. But I guess it's a bit like if you go and see a theatre production that has a matinee in the afternoon and an evening performance. It's the same show with the same script, but whether you see precisely the same performance, you know, human nature might depend a bit. So yes, it is going to start right now. See, we're here. Can someone say when the live tuition study planner will be available? Yes, well, I'm the one producing that, so I'm the answer to that. My apologies, I'm a bit behind time, start of term, holidays, etc. I will be finishing that off by Friday of this week, so it will be posted then. But in terms of the dates are all fixed right now. This class will happen on a Wednesday all the way through term with one difference. I think it's week 5 or possibly week 4, I can't remember. There's a gap and no Wednesday class because I'm teaching overseas. And then at another week, we will have a Wednesday and a Friday to make up for the missing week. So we're Wednesdays all the way through tuition. We have got 8 classes in the tuition session of 2 hours each. And my aim is always to do the whole 2 hours all the way through with no break. There is then a separate revision program which happens in the month before the final exam. The revision program is 4 sessions long, is very much focused on going through loads and loads of questions from recent exam papers. And those sessions are slightly longer. They're 2.5 hours long. Yes, 2.5 hours. Had to think then. As I was saying, we've got 8 sessions. But in addition to that, I also need to tell you, and apologies because I've put my piece of paper down. Where is it? Right, can't find the piece of paper I was looking for, so I'll just carry on regardless. Okay, let's start writing a few things and going through the introduction in a bit more detail. So, as I was saying, we run these classes 3 times a day, and if you are one of my classroom students, and when I say my classroom, one of our classroom students, our London evening and London weekend classes will all run the same, same structure. It's a little bit complicated because we've actually got 3 different tutors, one doing the evening, another doing the weekend, and me doing these online ones. But if you are on our classroom courses in the UK, you have got access to these online sessions as part of that program. These online classes will run at exactly the same pace as the evening and weekend. That's the plan, just a different face doing them. As I said, we've got 8 sessions. And after each pair of classes, 2, 4, 6 and 8, there is a progress test question for you to have a go at. And once you've had a go at it, there will be a filmed answer to that question, showing you not just what the answer is, but also the approach that you should have taken in going about that exercise. After classes 4 and 8, so halfway through the course and then after the end of the course, there is a half an hour live online question and answer mentoring session with me. And I will be coming along to those 2 sessions with some material to help us revise what we've done so far up to that point of the course. But the main purpose of those sessions is to allow you to ask me questions about what you've seen so far. But I'll bring some material just in case no one has anything to ask. So do use those mentoring sessions. They will act as a sort of interim revision session before the full revision on the separate course in November. In answer to one of the questions I can see up on the screen next to me, and if you do have questions and type them in, just to my left here, you can't see it, but there's a big screen. I can see questions coming in. If you ask, I will answer. Oh, excuse me. And one of the questions I see up there is about downloading, see again these sessions. We record all of the classes so that afterwards you can watch them again, but I'm pretty sure you have to watch them on the platform. I don't think we allow people to download them. That is pure safety. If we let people download these, the risk is they start getting sent to friends, copied around the world. We need a bit of control over our intellectual property and copyright here. So I think you'll find you can watch it, but you can't save it and download it as a separate document. Right, so that is how the course is going to work. Before we get into F8, we've got some administration things we need to cover. And also, I should introduce myself a bit more fully. So my name is Paul. And as well as being the senior F8 tutor and also the senior P7 tutor, the advanced audit and assurance exam paper, I'm also head of LSBF's ACCA courses. Just a little bit about me for reasons you'll see in a minute. I have been teaching for 18 years, 3 months and about 8 days. So I've been doing this for ages. I was an examiner for a while. Not for the ACCA, but an examiner in audit. I have been head of training for a firm of accountants and auditors in London, so actual proper auditors doing actual audit work. What else do you need to know? In 2010, I went out from LSBF to Singapore to open our Singapore office, ran the professional school there for 3 years, came back last summer. I have taught students all over the world in over 20 countries. So wherever you currently are on the planet, be assured, since this is an audit and assurance course, be assured that your tutor knows what he is talking about. In fact, There you go. Now, one thing I should tell you about me is I try to make classes entertaining, interesting, because if you're entertained, you're more likely to stay awake, be interested, and absorb what I'm saying. But everything I do in the classroom is done for a reason. Sometimes I might tell you the score of my favourite football team over the weekend. If I'm doing that, it's not because I want you to know it, it's probably because I think you need 30 seconds downtime for your brain to rest, so I'll do something that's not auditing. Why am I suggesting to you that I am the best accountancy tutor in the world? Well, it's just an opinion, of course, my opinion. The question is, do you feel assured, confident about me as a tutor when I say that? And maybe you do. But maybe you're also sitting there saying, well, hang on a minute, you're bound to say that about yourself. Because the problem we have with me saying this is that I am not independent. Just because I think I'm good does not mean I am good. So if you want some more assurance about me, probably the best place to get assurance is not from me. Now, there are other places you might get some assurance from, and we'll talk more about that when we get into chapter 1 of the class notes. I'm just setting you up here with something we can just carry forward a little bit. As far as me, what else should you know? I've got 4 children, which is why I look terrible. Talking about football, I'm a Queen's Park Rangers fan. It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it. And I'll enjoy this moment just very briefly, because I won't get to say this probably ever again. We are currently above Manchester United in the Premier League table. It won't last, so let me enjoy it for 5 seconds while I can. That's probably about as much about me as you need to know. When the study planner finally goes up, and apologies for that, it's my fault, you will get my email address on there. So in the meantime, let me provide it now. There you go. So if you've got any queries in between today's course and next week's course, please feel free to email and ask. Right. So, what shall I talk to you about next? Let me talk to you about your books, materials, etc. and explain how we are going to be using those. For the purposes of the classes, watching them, there are only 2, maybe 3 things you need access to. I will be taking you through the class notes. The class notes were originally written by me. They've been updated while I was in Singapore by one of my senior colleagues. Now I'm back, I'm updating them again myself. So they're a mixture of 2 of us really, I guess, who've put them together. The class notes, you don't really need to have them yourself, because during class all I'll do is this, and I'll put them up on the screen, and as a result we can all see them anyway, so no great problem. The second thing you'll need, which I will also put up on the screen, are questions. Because as I'm about to explain, and this is very important, auditing is a very practical paper. And if it's practical, we need to practice. Those questions we'll be practicing will come from one of 2 sources. We have our revision kit. And the revision kit has got loads of past exam questions, plus some other stuff which I'll explain in a minute. Lots of good stuff for us to practice. And whenever I'm using our revision kit, as with the class notes, I will put the question up on the screen so you can see if you don't have it with you. And sometimes we will want to look at a more recent exam question that is not in our kit book yet. And if we do that, we will simply download it from the ACCA's website. And again, the question paper will be up on the screen during the class, and I'll refer to it as necessary. When you finally see the study planner, it will tell you which questions I'm aiming to do during the various sessions during the course. So if you want to download them yourself so that you can take a look at them or look them up in the revision kit, you can. So that's going to use in class. The other thing that you will get access to is a study manual. And there's a couple of things I need to tell you about the study manual and also about our other material. Just before I do that, this is a very practical paper. I like to think that auditing is a bit like learning to swim. Well, you wouldn't learn to swim by reading a textbook, would you? No. You might talk to an expert, hello, that's me, who might guide you in your swimming technique and how you can get better and stop sinking, and that's my job here. But if you want to learn to swim, I think we all know that there's only really one way of doing it, isn't there? Whilst I was in Singapore, I went on a short holiday with my family, and at the time we moved to Singapore, 3 of my children were very young and couldn't swim. My youngest learned how to swim in a very interesting manner. We'd gone on a short holiday while we were there, and he jumped into the swimming pool thinking it was the shallow bit. It was the deep bit. He was only 4. The good news is that within about 5 seconds he worked out that if you flap your arms and legs around, your head tends to stay above water. It wasn't great, but by the time I jumped in, he'd almost got to the side. And we dragged him out, got the water out of his mouth, stopped him crying after about 3 or 4 minutes, when he turned to me and said, "Daddy, can I do that again?" And now he jumped in on purpose and got to the side. And then he jumped in again, and again, and again, jumping further and further away so he could see how far he could get swimming to the side. You learn to swim by swimming. I don't have to teach you how to audit because I'm not training you to go and audit real companies. I'm training you to pass exam questions. So if you'd like to learn how to pass exam questions, guess what? We're going to do exam questions. It's the only way. I will demonstrate technique to improve you because that's what you're paying me for. But if you think I'm just going to stand here and tell you lots of facts which you go and memorise, does not work on F8. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute or two. It's very important. But my point is this: the study manual for a paper like this is not going to be very useful because it's a study manual, it's a technical book, and because F8 is so practical, I would not get too excited about the study manual. Every fact you need to know for the exam is in the class notes, so I'd stick with them if I were you. Now, there is something I need to tell you though, because for the December 14 exam sitting, two things are changing with the F8 paper. One of them is important to understand, and the other is nothing. There are some syllabus changes from the June 14 sitting through to December. But the changes are extremely small. They're just minor updates and nothing else. And the reason why the syllabus changes are very small on F8 this time is because the ACCA are doing something rather bigger on F8 this time. That is, there is a change in the exam paper format. And that is a rather bigger deal. Now, it's not going to change how you study the paper, but it will change a little bit your own practice at the end. As you may well be aware, because this affects papers F4, F5, F7, F8 and F9, the ACCA are bringing in multiple choice questions. Only for part of the paper, not the whole paper, but they're bringing in MCQs. The only real reason they're doing this is they want to be able to speed up the marking process, and MCQs have one right answer, which means computers can mark that bit. So they're hoping they can get the exam results back to students more quickly. Why do they want that? Because next year the ACCA, at the end of next year, start to move to 4 sittings a year. And they can only do that if they can get the exams marked more quickly. Because otherwise, by the time you get your results back, then the next exam sitting's happening, which is ridiculous. Now, what do I need to tell you? The class notes and revision kit, the revision kit with all the questions in, well, they are all updated to reflect the new format. Whoops. So, for example, in the kit, I think I'm right, there are 128, if my memory is right, MCQs to practice. And the reason I'm fairly comfortable with that number and confident it's right is I'm the one who wrote all 128 of them, covering the entire syllabus. So do not worry, in terms of exam questions, the things you're practicing are in the formats you need. But, just so you are aware and realise this is no problem at all, in the study manual we have forgotten to update the syllabus and study guide and exam format all still say June 14. Oops. But it does not affect the content. The syllabus changes are so tiny, you really don't need to know about them. There is one thing you need to know, and when we get to that part of the course, I'll point it out. But it's nothing new to learn. It's something that was on the syllabus, a very small thing, that the examiner said she's not going to test anymore. But to be honest, she never tested it anyway, really. So the books are fine, everything's cool, but when you open the study manual, in the opening pages, if you look at the syllabus study guide in there, they are out of date, okay? And the main issue there is the exam format, it will tell you, is the old one. In terms of the exam format, let me show you what the old one was and the new one. Partly to help any resit students looking at this see what's changing. Partly to reassure you that essentially they're the same thing, doesn't affect how we study at all. And partly because I just want to demonstrate the sort of questions you're going to see. I should also point out, if we do a very recent past exam question, we'll download it from ACCA's website, which means it will be old format, not new. But as I said, it doesn't make any difference. The study manual not being updated was just an admin error, largely because we've spent all our time, of course, having to rewrite the revision kit, because as you're about to see, the exam format changing means we've had to change every single question that was in there, and that's a fairly big job. So the admin stuff at the front of the manual got overlooked. These mistakes can happen. But as I said, it makes no difference to using the books, so relax. Okay. Let me show you the old format and the new format. Under the old exam format, there was a 30-mark question, a 10-mark question, and then 3 20-mark questions. Everything compulsory, but then in the new format, everything's compulsory as well. And the point was this. Question 1, mostly practical. Question 2 was testing pure knowledge. And questions 3 to 5 were about 60% practical and 40% knowledge. So that's the old exam format, which is now gone. The new format, well, in section A, there are 4 MCQ multi-choice questions of 1 mark each, and there are 8 MCQs of 2 marks each, which gives you 20 marks. And in section B, written questions, 4 of 10, 2 of 20, giving you a total of 100% overall. So, it is still partly knowledge but mostly application, and the only real difference is that the knowledge, instead of having to be written out in words, is now going to end up being tested with multiple choice questions. So there's no need to explain your knowledge, just pick the right answer. I think that is likely to help students a bit, because one of the biggest reasons people have been failing F8, and it's had a terrible pass rate, is most students are not very good at explaining their understanding in words. I'll say more about that in a little while. Now, there will still be some need to explain knowledge in words, because the 6 long questions in section B are going to have some knowledge in them. It's just there won't be so much anymore, because most of the knowledge will be tested by the multiple choice questions. All that's really happening is that the practical stuff that was 30 marks and 20 marks is now going to be 20 and 10. Now, to help us out, the ACCA have issued specimen exam papers for F4, F5, F7, and F9 on their website to show us what the new format will look like. That's helpful because it gives us 12 MCQ questions, but only 12's not enough, is it? Which is why I've written 128 for you. Aren't I lovely? And it also shows us what the 6 long questions will look like. Well, of course, we're used to 20-mark questions because we've always had those. What we haven't seen are what 10-mark questions would look like, and the good news is they are simply 20-mark questions with a bit less information. They're the same style. And just to prove this point, the specimen exam paper 10-mark, 20-mark questions are not brand new questions. All the examiner has done is taken recent past exam questions of 20 and 30 marks and broken them up and created new 10 and 20s. They're the same stories. Thus proving that the exam involves doing the same studying as it always has done of the same material, it's just the marks are different. So relax. But we know you like to see what's actually happening on the exam. So the revision kit, we have actually gone and changed the entire bank of questions that were in there and changed them from 30s and 20s into 20s and 10s. So there's been a lot of splitting up going on. If you are using an old revision kit, which you really shouldn't be, but if you've got hold of an old one, It's still fine to practice, but don't have it with you when we're doing class questions, because we've had to renumber everything and it will just be chaos. MCQs affect the pass rate. Will they increase or decrease? Well, if you don't know something and it wants you to explain it in words, you're going to score 0. If you don't know something but it's a multiple choice question, if you guess right, you'll get marks. So on that basis, I would expect the marks to go up a bit and the pass rate to go up a bit. On the other hand, there's going to be a lot of practical stuff to do in those 80 marks of long questions. So if the overall balance of the paper has more practical stuff to do on it, that will work in the opposite direction. My suspicion, to be honest, is that with all the F papers changing at the same time, it would be very easy for the ACCA to bump the pass rate up a bit on those papers. At the moment, on those papers, it averages about 38 to 45% on the Fs. It wouldn't surprise me if they creep up a little bit, maybe 3%. So if you're a marginal student, this could save you. I might be wrong though, we'll wait and see, but the ACCA are worried that the pass rates on their F papers are so low, so this would be an obvious opportunity for all of them to creep up, but we shall see. We really don't know, to be honest. The good news about F8 is there's not that much knowledge, so if you've covered all the MCQs in my book, the revision kit, I think there's a pretty strong chance you'll get high recognition on exam day, because there's only so many questions that can be asked. It's not like a numbers paper where you can change all the numbers and have what looks like a different calculation. Knowledge is knowledge. So as long as you've practiced the MCQs a lot, lots of good repetition, I think you'll be pretty happy on exam day with whatever she chooses to set you. Most of the MCQs will have 4 answers to choose from. The 1 mark MCQs will probably only have 3 answers to choose from. Even better. So there we go. That is what the new format looks like, and therefore that's most of the questions that we will be practicing. Okay. Another thing I need to tell you is this. In the past, there was an F8 International, F8 UK, F8 Singapore, F8 Ireland, I think, F8, I think even Hong Kong. Those are now gone from December 2014. It's F8 International only. There are no other variants. To be honest, it doesn't make much difference because for many sittings now, all the variants have been asking the same questions and had the same answers. So the variants just became pointless. So if you are practicing questions and you accidentally pick your question from F8 Singapore instead of F8 International, trust me, it doesn't make any difference. So that is fine. But just be careful with that. I've had some students tell me that the F8 paper has disappeared. No, it hasn't. Just the variants. So F8 International carries on fine. That's the same on F7, by the way. F7 and F8 are all international now. Okay, so that is that. We've done that, we've done that. Let me talk to you about the F8 paper. What's actually on it? Well, the title of the paper is Audit and Assurance, so presumably the paper's got some audit and assurance. Yay, well done. Well, it turns out that 90% roughly of this paper is what we call the external audit. And the external audit involves auditors checking the accuracy of a company's published financial statements. So most of the exam paper looks at the external audit process, and I'll give you a bit of guidance as to how that process works in a couple of minutes. Around about 7% of the paper looks at something called internal audit. Now normally, if someone says to you an auditor, you probably assume external audit checking accounts. Internal auditors, though, are also checking things, but they are checking whether the operations, processes, control systems of a company are working. So it's an internal check. So, give you a simple example. I said to you earlier that we have a policy of trying to make our classroom courses, the evening and weekend courses, run at the same pace as these online classes. Well, I'm a member of management here, and that is partly my decision. I need some assurance that it is happening. So how can I get that assurance? Well, there's various things I could do. I could get some student feedback from all the various groups and see what students tell me is going on. I could go and sit in a classroom course wearing a baseball cap pulled down under my eyes and make sure that the tutor doesn't realise it's me, and I can see if the tutor is following the plan I've given them or they're making it up as they go along. That is examples of internal audit work. I'm checking that our processes are happening properly. And then we have the other 3%. And whilst it's only 3%, it does come up from time to time and could therefore be worth about 3 marks. And it's one of the first things we're going to see on the course. This course is called Audit and Assurance, and what you can see up on the screen right now both says audit. So what's this other assurance thing? Audit is a type of assurance. So for example, with external audit, it is about trying to assure the shareholders of a company that the accounts, the financial statements they're being sent, are somewhere close to the truth. But sometimes accountants are asked to give opinions on things, to give assurance about something else, not the accounts. Let me give you an example. Imagine there's a company that wants to raise some money, some new investment. And the company has decided that it wants debt, not equity. So it's not going to its shareholders, it's going to go to its bank and try to borrow some money. Well, banks will normally want to see some forecasts to show what the company is expecting to do in the near future to make sure it looks like the company can afford to pay back the loan. If the finance director produces some forecasts and goes to the bank and says, "Hello, I'd like to borrow some money, please. Here are my forecasts," one of the problems the bank's got is the same problem you had earlier when I said I'm the best tutor. Well, yeah, but I'm the one saying it. The bank is looking at these forecasts and thinking, well, it looks good, but then you produce this and you want it to look good, because if it looks good, we're more likely to lend you the money. So I'm not sure I believe that these forecasts are accurate. So if companies are looking to borrow money, it would make a lot of sense to go get an independent accountant to look at their forecasts, put some sort of opinion at the bottom as to whether those forecasts look accurate, and then go to the bank. And that's what we mean by non-audit assurance. Checking something, but it's not last year's accounts. It's checking something else. And in Chapter 1, we'll take a look at the issues that creates. Now, obviously, 7 and 3 are fairly small numbers. 90% is a huge number. So let me break down the external audit process so you can see what types of thing we're going to be looking at. To be honest, the main reason I'm doing this is not to explain the syllabus, because that's boring. We might as well just look at the class notes to do that. The reason I'm doing this is because each of these areas, these stages in the process, are likely to be the long questions, the 10 and 20 markers in Section B. One of the great things about auditing is it's not really changed over the years. If you were looking at a 25-year-old exam paper, the questions would look very similar, as would the answers, to today's. Which means I can tell you right now that there's about 5 or 6 core areas that tend to come up, and as long as you're well practiced in how to attempt those, this is a very easy paper. But it's always been slightly annoying because under the old exam format, we only had 4 practical questions, a 30 and 3 20s. And if you've got 6 core areas and 4 questions, at least one is likely to not come up at each sitting. And if you've been preparing for that, it's a bit annoying. Now we've got 6 separate questions, I'm pretty sure that all the core areas will come up every time. So you know exactly how you need to prepare. So what are the stages of an external audit? Well, the first stage is to consider a few things before you even accept appointment as auditor to a company. And the biggest thing we'll need to look at in there is ethics. Once we've been appointed, we will then plan the audit. And once we've planned it, we will look at our client's internal controls. And then we'll do some substantive testing. We will then review our process and do some finalization tasks. And then we will issue an audit report. And those are the 6 main stages of the external audit. That ties into the class notes because that's the order in which we're going to study the course. So let's see if I can get this right. Pre-appointment is covered by Chapter 2, planning is 3, controls are 4, substantive testing is 5, 6, 7, review is 8, reporting is 9. The only things missed out, Chapter 1, which is introduction, what is assurance, and Chapter 10, which is internal audit, which we do at the end. But those are also going to be the backbone of the written questions. You will probably get 1 question on each of those. But the ones that tend to come up for the most marks and are guaranteed on every paper are these 3. The 3 we cover towards the middle of the course. And if you look back at recent exam papers, there's always at least 30 marks on those 3 areas, and there have been up to 50 marks on those 3 areas. So if you're good at the practical side of just those 3, and you've done your knowledge, you'll be pretty good at the MCQs. I think you're likely to be safe in passing this. So those 3 are your absolute priority. But given we know all 6 of those are coming up, almost certainly, you may as well make sure you're good at all 6. Okay, so I've taken you through the exam paper, given you a brief-ish overview of the course and the important areas. I should also, I suppose, tell you that your examiner is called Pammy, and you can be reassured that she's not trying to trick you. Her exam questions have all been very predictable, nothing I can really criticise about any of them. Whenever I see one of her exam papers, I sit back and think, well, that's exactly what we thought would come up, so there are no excuses for not passing. She's been the examiner since 2010. Now that means that especially on revision, when we're trying to hone our exam technique, we will be looking at her questions all the way through revision. Because once you get that close to the exam, doing things exactly the way you're likely to see them on exam day makes a lot of sense. However, as I said before, auditing has barely changed in my lifetime, and as such, doing slightly older questions is no problem at all. They are very good practice. When I was changing the revision kit for this sitting, because the question marks allocations have changed, I did have the opportunity of taking some questions out of the book if I didn't think they were any good and adding some in. So this revision kit that we will be using, all the questions in there are fine. If they weren't, I'd have taken them out. Can we use old past paper questions for practice? Yes. The revision kit, all the questions in there, or pretty much all of them, are old past exam questions. Plus, for the more recent papers, we can get them from the ACCA's website. So that's fine, yeah, not a problem at all. Okay, so I've covered all of that, Now some bad news, but also some good news. The pass rate for F8 is a disaster. Over the last 7 years, which is how long we've had the exam paper, over the last 7 years, 14 sittings, F8 is the worst pass rate of all 9 F papers. If you look at all 16 ACCA papers, F8 is the 14th out of 16. And by the way, 16th out of 16 is the advanced audit paper. There is something about audit which causes problems. And if you want to pass this paper, it's pretty critical at this stage that you start to understand why people struggle with this, because if you understand that from the beginning, all the way through the course, you'll do things the right way and not the wrong way. So why is the pass rate so bad? One problem is you cannot pass this by memorising the textbook. Remember, it's like learning to swim. You can't get much from a book. And the majority of students I've met are very good at going away and memorising things, but not very good when they're given a story and asked, what do you think the issues are? So that's one problem. It is practical. Second problem. Anything that is practical will have techniques, and those techniques have to be practiced. And yes, I know you're the exception who does everything right. Rubbish. No, you're not. Students do not practice. Now, when I say you do not practice, you'll go, oh, yes, yeah, you might practice what you want to practice. What you're not going to do is practice what I want you to practice. Let me explain. Whenever anyone comes to me and says, Paul, I failed the F8 paper, What am I doing wrong? How can you help me? I say, good question. I've no idea what you're doing wrong. Because I was not in the exam hall on exam day, I don't know what you wrote. So if you want me to help you, that's fine, I will. Stage 1, please go back to the last sitting, go take a look at the exam paper and write out some answers for me, your answers. Because then we can get together and I can look at what you're writing, I can ask you how you approach the questions, and trust me, I'll find something you're doing very badly. And do you know what? In the entire number of years I've been teaching, I have said that to hundreds of resit students and said I will quite happily look at this and give you some advice. And out of those hundreds of students I've asked, how many students have actually gone and had another crack at the last sitting and let me have a look at it? 2 in the entire time. Everyone else says, oh yeah, I'll do that, thank you so much. And no one ever sends me anything. That is ridiculous, but proves my point. And one of the reasons it happens like that, and by the way, the 2 people who did it both passed their resit. One of the reasons people don't like doing it is that the audit paper has virtually no calculations on it, and students don't like writing. And when I say writing, I mean proper sentences in full as if you were writing the real exam paper. No one wants to do it. It's hard work, it's tough, it's annoying. So no one does it. And then on exam day, it's pretty much the first time they've tried to write a full exam answer in proper sentences with proper explanations and under time pressure. And what a surprise, it goes horribly wrong. This is crazy. In your driving test, you have to reverse around a corner. You have to do an emergency stop. So of course, you practice that in your lessons over and over again, because you know you're going to get asked to do it. And yet accountancy students are told, you will have to do this type of question and explain yourself. As, oh, okay then. And they think they can learn by reading the examiner's answers or watching mine. Doesn't work. I can show you the technique, but you need to swim, and properly. Full answers in full sentences. Now at this stage of the course, our primary focus needs to be on making sure you understand things and can come up with enough ideas. Towards the end of the course, and particularly on revision, we focus on your explanations. But please, the more you can force yourself to do it, the better. When you try a question, go on, give yourself the full 20 minutes, 35 minutes, whatever it is, and try writing it out. A lot of people say, oh, Paul, you're so good at explaining things. Well, why do you think I'm good at explaining things? I've been explaining the same things for the last 18 years. If I wasn't good at explaining things by now, I'm never going to be able to, am I? I'm doing these classes 3 times a day, as I said. I did P7 3 times a day on Monday, and I did an exam question with them. In the first class, my explanation was okay. In the second class, it was getting better. My explanation in the third class was beautiful. Hardly a surprise when you've tried explaining the same thing 3 times in the space of about 6 hours. Repetition works. So please, please, please practice. But even then, there are other reasons why people fail. Before we start the chapter, I'm going to be giving you some general tips that work all the way through the course. I'll then give you specific tips for specific parts of the course on how we're going to approach things and what you need to be doing. And one of those focuses on the issue of explanations. If you saw someone's real exam paper, many of them, to try and earn 1 mark, someone writes about 3 words. Well, I don't know what you mean in 3 words. I need clarity. I need sentences. Frankly, if you're writing anything less than about 10 words, I very much doubt you're going to get any marks, because it just won't be meaningful enough. But anyway, more on that shortly. But there's something else that I'll be saying to you throughout the course, and especially when we're doing questions, about techniques. Okay, I'm going to tell you techniques that work, and your job for exam day is to make sure you know them. But it goes beyond that. I am a very keen golfer. I don't get to play golf as much as I'd like because I work too hard, and secondly, with 4 children, there's a limit to how often I can get out. Realistically, I get to play golf about twice a year, maximum. And golf, like most things, has techniques to make you better, and if you're not practicing it regularly, that can be a problem. But I don't hit the ball quite as far as I would like, but what I'm pretty good at is hitting the golf ball straight. Now, if you're only hitting a golf ball a little way, you know, you're just doing this, hitting it straight's not that hard. But when you're at the beginning of a hole and the hole that you're aiming for is a long way away, you've got to hit that ball pretty hard. And at speed, the chance of you not hitting it straight goes up. But I can hit it straight. And the reason I hit it straight is this. If you ever played golf with me, you will see and hear something a bit weird, because whilst I'm about to hit the ball, I start talking to myself. And the reason I'm talking to myself is this. I know how to hit the ball straight because I've seen videos with golf instructors. I've been told by professionals, I know how to do it. The 2 most basic things you've got to do are you've got to keep your head still and your eyes on the ball as you're hitting it. And secondly, it's about follow through. So you've got to do this. Keep your head looking down, keep it still. But that is extremely difficult for 2 reasons. Reason 1, if your body is rotating this way, your head wants to go with it. It's natural physical. You've actually got to force your head to stay still. And secondly, if you're hitting a ball in that direction, your eyes naturally want to go and take a look and see where the ball is going. Don't. And the only way I can make myself keep my head still and follow through is as I hit the ball on a golf course, I'm telling myself, saying out loud, keep your head still, follow through, head still, follow through, head still, follow through. Because unless I'm thinking it as I do it, I'll make a mistake. On the first hole, every time I play a round of golf, I'm great. Because I've had all the time before getting to the golf course, the journey there, thinking, you know, Paul, you'll really enjoy this more if you don't lose the golf ball and if you shoot a low score, and you'll do that if you hit it straight. So the whole way there, I'm thinking hit it straight, head down, follow through, head still, all the way. And on the first hole, fabulous. Second hole, probably remember. But then you get a bit further into the round and your friends are talking to you and you're thinking, oh, I did well on the last hole. And now you start getting pressured. And now you get up to hole 5, hole 6, hole 7, and you're about to hit the ball and you forget to tell yourself the rules, and all you're thinking is, I'm going to try and hit it a bit further this time. And you wallop it and you're looking, and where's the ball gone? And the ball is still there because you've totally missed it and you look like a total idiot. And all of that has happened because you forgot to think the right technique as you were doing it. So, my friends, the key to passing this paper is to listen to what I tell you and remember it, but also, when planning and writing your answers, you have got to have Paul's technique in your thoughts. You do that, you'll hit the ball straight, which in terms of F8 means you're going to pass. So the technique is really, really important. I cannot overemphasize it. And I said earlier on, I am the best tutor in the world. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. I think I am. I genuinely believe that you are getting a great education in terms of passing this paper from me. But maybe you'd like a little bit of more independent assurance. Because, confirmed yesterday, one of my students from the June sitting got 89% on F8, and that was 4th on the planet. And given how many people sit the F8 exam, which I think is about 25,000, 4th out of 25,000, I would argue, is pretty good. And if you're now thinking, yeah, Paul, but this guy is in London, probably works for Deloitte or Ernst & Young or PwC or KPMG, is doing auditing at work every single day of their working lives, is a genius with 5 degrees from Cambridge University, is English speaking, which means writing is really easy for them. Wrong. Wrong. Because this student who got 89% and came 4th in the world lives in Kenya, is 18 years old, has never worked in audit. English is therefore not necessarily, they speak decent English, don't get me wrong, but it's not their only primary language being spoken. And the really assuring thing to you, I hope, is this student did this course, this online course, last term. So this is one of last term's class on this very product. So based on all of that, I hope you are feeling confident that I know what I'm talking about, because we have a certain element of proof here, and that you feel confident that this course is going to help you pass, because on written papers, confidence is very important, because if you're not confident, the way you will explain yourself will sound a bit confused. Thank you very much. Very kind. We do this with our tutor training as well. We say to tutors, look, when you teach something for the first time, you've got to forget that you're doing it the first time and make it feel and look like you've done it forever. Because if you're not confident, it will come over in your explanations and the students will think this person doesn't know what they're talking about. It's the same for you in the exam. Now, this should all be good news for you, because passing F8 is not difficult if you get what I've just said. And I want to share an interesting statistic with you before we look at some tips and then get straight into chapter 1. Imagine we were mapping the ACCA student results, which the ACCA do. They do a lot of research on pass rate statistics. You might assume that it looks something like this. And with auditing, the pass rate is usually somewhere between 35 and 40%, so let's call it, I don't know, 38%. 38% passing, 62% below the pass mark, with a sort of bulge of students scoring somewhere in the sort of 40 to 45 mark maybe. Because that would make sense, wouldn't it? Normal distribution, some geniuses up at the top scoring high marks, some disasters scoring close to 0, but most people somewhere towards the middle. And for most of the exams with ACCA, that is exactly what it looks like. But recently they did a presentation and they said that for both audit papers, F8 and P7, they discovered something interesting. because for F8 it actually looks like this. There are 2 bumps. And the reason why there are 2 bumps is very simple. Those people who think you can learn this exam out of a book and memorize stuff fail. And those people who've got the technique pass it. As you can imagine, over the years, I've had a lot of students come to me and say, Paul, I've failed the F8 exam. And I say, okay, come and book on my course and let's see if I can show you maybe a different way through this. And they tend to jump from here to here. They don't get 5 extra marks, they get 25 extra marks. This is one of those exams where if you get it, you'll pass. And if you don't get it, you won't. Definitely won't. Now, of course, some students do score 49, 50, 51, but there are much bigger bumps of students that aren't right around the pass mark. So as long as you listen to my techniques and practice them and think them as you are hitting the auditing ball and can keep your head looking down, you are going to pass this paper. Will you get 89%? I'd love you to, but maybe not, we'll see. But you'll hit 70, 75 and think, what was all the fuss about? Okay, some tips before we get into chapter 1. As I said, some individual areas of the course have their own tips, and we'll do all of those as we go through the course. But there are some useful tips overall as well. Tip number 1. When you do this exam, many of the long questions, the Part B questions, will have dates in them. Some of the MCQs will have dates in them as well. And the dates are important, and it's important to know that this is a real-time exam. Now, the best way for me to explain that is with an example. So you will sit on December the 4th, is it? I think it is, 2014. So if the question says that your client's year end is November the 30th, 2014, please note that that was 4 days ago, because today is December the 4th. And that could have an impact on how you go about answering this. If, for example, you were checking, I don't know, the value of their year-end inventory, don't start saying, oh, I'd see how much they sold it for after the year end. Because if there's only been 4 days, there's a pretty good chance they haven't sold it yet. So how would you check? So you've got to use a bit of common sense with the dates that you're presented with. This gives us a little bit of a challenge when we're practicing old questions, because you need to know what the exam date is. And of course, the old questions are from lots of different exam dates. So to make our lives a little bit easier, in the questions in the revision kit, wherever necessary, the question will tell you, assume today's date is this, so that the dates in the question then make sense. But if you do decide to go and look at a past exam paper on ACCA's website, please be aware that you need to know what exam sitting you are looking at when you're doing the questions, because the dates in the questions won't have been changed. They'll be the originals from the original exam day. Ooh, a question. An examiner's words for us like explain, define, describe, etc. What, you don't know what the word define means? That's what dictionaries do, it's what it means. In terms of explain, describe, etc., they're not really different. My message to you, as I'm about to say on the screen, is this. I don't really care what the examiner's question says in terms of important verbs. The ACCA, or at least our examiner, doesn't seem that bothered by it. If a question says list, well, list then. List cities in England. London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. But if a question said describe cities in England, well, you can't just say London is a city in England. That's not describing anything. I would say something like London is the capital city and largest city in England, largely because it's based in the southeast of the country, nearest the other countries on the European mainland, and is based on one of the largest rivers in the UK, the Thames, which flows out into the North Sea, which is the sea that links us to those other countries. So in the old days, when everything was done by shipping, the obvious place to have a settlement was on the River Thames. There you go. Wasn't expecting to do that. I've just explained what London is. And notice how many words I used. Whereas when it just said list cities, I said London. And one of the biggest problems on this exam is a lot of students, even if it says explain London, will just say London is a big city. That's not an explanation. That's rubbish. So if you want to make sure you're explaining things, one of the words you should use the most in your answers is because. Because that will force you to explain things and will mean you will write twice as much as you otherwise would do, and that will see you through. Now, there are other words that are similar to because. For example, in order to, or just to. Why did you get the train, Paul? Because I wanted to go to London. Why did you get the train, Paul? To go to London. Would work, wouldn't it? But try to make sure that you use the word because or to in as many of the points you write as possible. And the only way you're going to do that is if while you're writing your points, you are thinking, mumbling under your breath, I must say because, I must say because. Don't say it out loud on exam day. They'll throw you out of the exam hall. Think it as you are writing. We won't be doing a past exam question today, but from class number 2 onwards, we will be. And when we do them, I'm going to be telling you what you should be thinking as we do them. I can't do that on exam day. They won't let me into the exam hall. So you have got to tell yourself to think it. It's a bit like the golf I was mentioning earlier. If I was having golf lessons, my instructor would be standing behind me saying, Paul, you're about to hit the ball. Keep your head still, eyes down, as I do it. No instructor, I have to remember to tell myself. That's your job in the exam hall. One final point on useful tips. We're not doing a question today, so I will say this again when we do a question. In terms of presentation, how much you should be writing, etc., what you're looking for are pages in your answer book that look something like this. Headings, and then each point you make another heading, So, headings underlined makes the script look more pleasant to the person marking it. and each point you make 2 to 3 lines of writing minimum. Most students write a lot less than that unless pushed. So you've got to force yourself to write more. Best way to do that? Remember to say because. It's very difficult to come up with a sentence with the word because in it, which is less than 10 words. Okay, well, the nature of auditing, as you've seen, is a bit different to other exams in terms of how to pass. So I like to spend a large chunk of class number 1 focusing on how we're going to do this and technique. Now that I have got you thinking all the right lovely thoughts, we're going to go take a look at chapter number 1 and hit the class notes. Chapter number 1 is a very different chapter to all the others because chapter number 1, is almost pure knowledge. And that makes it a fairly easy chapter because all you've got to do at the end of the day is go and learn. Those bits that I say are worth learning. But there is one thing in chapter number 1 which is very useful for you not just to learn but to actually understand as well. And practice explaining, and that is the concept of assurance. So there's a little intro to chapter number 1, relatively light chapter. Let's go take a look at the class notes and we can begin. So chapter 1 is entitled Assurance. It's very much an introduction to the course and it's mostly looking at concepts. If we just go down to the contents of the chapter, you can see the first section is largely about concepts, assurance, audit, etc. We then look specifically at the statutory audit. Statutory is another word for external. So we're checking financial statements are accurate. Statutory means legally required. So the reason it's often referred to as statutory is having your accounts checked by someone is usually the law. In most countries you have to have that done. And we get to look at a bit of regulatory stuff and one of the highlights in there is probably corporate governance. I don't know if any of you are taking the P1 exam. If you're taking P1, you don't need to study corporate governance because you do it on P1 much more detail than F8. So if it comes up on F8, you're in a lovely position. Okay then, let's move it onwards. Page number 9 and take a look at what is this assurance thing. Well, it says up here, assurance is the product. What does that mean? Well, with an external audit, the product is the audit report at the end, and in the audit report, the auditor gives their opinion. Well, an opinion is an attempt to give assurance to those people reading the financial statements as to whether or not they can trust the numbers in there as being accurate. So another word for assurance is opinion. Moving down the page, another concept coming up here is agency theory. Now you should have seen agency before, maybe on the law paper, but just a quick reminder, with agency you have two people involved, a principal and an agent. Agency, the logic is that the principal wants something done, but they're going to pay an agent to do it for them. And the issue here is the principal needs to know whether the agent is doing it the way the principal wants, because if they're paying for it, they should get what they pay for. So principals and agents. There we go. So, a simple example here. You are paying us, LSBF, and primarily paying for me, because you want to pass this exam, and therefore you want to know what is on the syllabus, how to study it, how to understand it, how to do the exam questions, what is the examiner thinking, why do people fail the paper, etc. And you could go and find all that out for yourself. But it requires some expertise and it takes a lot of time, so you think, hang on, why don't I pay an agent, hello, that's me, to do all this for you? I am not standing here teaching for me. I should be standing here teaching for you. Because that's my job, that's what you are paying me for. But there is, of course, a danger with agency that instead of teaching what's good for you, I spend all my time in class teaching just those things that I like teaching, which is not necessarily going to help you pass the exam. So we have got here an agency risk, and what you, the principals, need to be assured about is that I, the agent, am doing the right teaching that will help get you through the exam. And that's one of the reasons I mentioned the student getting 89%, because if I was doing the wrong thing, he wouldn't be getting 89%, would he? No, he wouldn't. Of course, for F8, it's not tutors and students that we need to think about. The people who want something done are the shareholders. They want their company run properly by the directors, and they need to know that the financial statements produced by the directors are somewhere close to the truth. So with what we're doing, the principal is the shareholder. They need assurance that the director's numbers in the financial statements are accurate. You'll see it says true and fair view. We'll come back to what that might mean in a few minutes' time. There are loads of examples of assurance in the world. I've just given you an extra one. I've got 4 children, and therefore I care that the schools they go to are doing the right job. I don't have time to go and check myself. I get assurance because in the UK there is a government regulatory body called Ofsted, and Ofsted go into schools and check that they're doing things right. They audit schools, in other words. When you go and eat in a restaurant, you need assurance that they're not going to kill you by poisoning you. If you're going to an expensive restaurant, you would probably want some extra assurance that you're getting what you pay for. So when you go to restaurants, if you go somewhere cheap, they should at least have a health and safety certificate up to show they've been inspected and there were no rats in the fridge. And if you go to an expensive restaurant, if the chefs have won awards, they'll probably put those up on the wall. All to give you assurance that you're getting a good product. For our course, the 2 areas we need to look at for assurance are shareholders needing assurance about financial statements and directors needing assurance that systems are working, because that one is the external audit and this one, as I mentioned earlier, is the internal audit. So far, so good. I think we've mentioned the objective of external audit already, which is to give assurance that financial statements can be relied upon so that people buying, selling shares can use the accounts and trust that the data is reliable. So I think we've dealt with that. At the bottom of the page, a bit of history. This is only background for the exam, so don't get too excited about it. The key point really is this point here, because especially in the UK, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the concept of a company was becoming bigger and bigger. If I start a company, I'll be the shareholder and I will run it. And if those running the company, the directors, are the same people as the shareholders, well, if I prepare accounts, I'm not going to lie to myself, am I? I might still want someone to check my numbers just in case I've made a mistake, but the risk of the accounts being wrong is greatly reduced. But as companies get bigger and bigger, the chances are the people who run them, the directors, are not the same people as the people who own them, the shareholders. And the shareholders, now being separate, need to know that these directors are producing figures they can rely on. A good example, Facebook. When it started, Mark Zuckerberg owned it, but as he's gradually tried to build it to get new finance in, he's had to sell bits of it off to other people. And those other people want assurance that Mark Zuckerberg, when he runs Facebook, is doing the right thing. Now that concept of doing the right thing is coming up on the next page. Just before we do that, you'll also see in the notes shortly that we have something called audit standards that tell us auditors how to do an audit properly. We're meant to follow the process. There's about 35 audit standards, I think there are, covering every stage of the process. And a lot of people aren't aware that before about 1980, there weren't any standards. Accountants were just trusted as professionals to make it up for themselves and to do the right thing. It then became apparent that while some auditors were doing a great job, others were doing rubbish. So the idea of having standards that everyone should follow was developed. And it was during the 80s and the 1990s that the current set of standards we have were largely put together. Okay, on to the next page. And now we've got some stuff you need to know. Some of it is not that important, some of it a lot more important. This bit is not very important, so I'll just talk you through it quickly and then we can move on to something that is more important. Excuse me. Stewardship. A steward is simply someone who looks after something for somebody else. Directors look after companies for their owners, the shareholders. So directors are sometimes described as stewards. You could therefore argue that by auditing their accounts, we are helping to tell the shareholders whether the directors have performed their stewardship duties properly. Now, I have not seen stewardship on an auditing exam in about 5 million years, so the chance of that coming up is very small, at worst maybe an MCQ. Agency, I've just mentioned, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. Accountability, though, yes I am. Because with accountability, sort of ties in with the word accountant, doesn't it, and accounts. The logic is this: the directors are responsible for running the company for the shareholders. And shareholders need to hold the directors to judgment to see if the director's responsibilities have been followed. And being held to judgment, another word for that is to be held to account. So the idea is that financial statements are information for the shareholders to help the shareholders judge if the directors are doing their jobs properly in running the company. Thus, by us auditing those numbers, we help improve the accountability. But as I said, that section is not very important. Those concepts don't come up on the exam much. They are more background concepts. The next section, though, is much more important, and because of that we need to go on to a separate page. So we need to look at true and fair and reasonable assurance, and the two things are sort of quite closely linked. Okay then. Let's have a little think. Let's imagine that you've been feeling unwell recently. Not been feeling good at all. Not sure what it is, but it's gone on too long. Maybe you call up your doctor and you say, look, not been feeling good, it's not going away. And you go and see your doctor, describe all the symptoms, and the doctor says, okay, let's run lots of tests and see if we can find out what's happening. So the doctor runs lots of different tests, sends away some samples of blood and stuff to see what comes back from the lab, and after a week or so calls you back in. And after a week, the doctor is likely to say one of two things. Either the doctor will say, well, based on the tests, you are fine. Or the doctor will say, one of the tests is showing up that we think you're suffering from this. In other words, the doctor will say good news or bad news. But in either case, the doctor feels relatively sure, relatively confident, relatively positive that they're right in what they're saying. Why is that so? Well, the reason is that when you do detailed testing or detailed investigation, because you've done such detailed testing, you are going to be relatively sure, i.e., you are positive that your opinion, or your conclusion if you like, is correct. Now, you won't be 100% positive, because as a doctor you know that none of these tests are 100% perfect and you might have missed something, but you'll say, in my opinion, I'm pretty sure you're going to live, which is the best you're ever going to get out of a doctor. So because of the detailed work that's been done, you, the patient, end up with a relatively high level of assurance. However, maybe you've been feeling ill for a while, but you've not got round to phoning the doctor yet and arranging an appointment. And you're walking down the street one day and, oh, what luck, who is walking towards you the other way up the pavement? It's your doctor. How lucky is that? So you say hello and say, oh, hello, doctor. And the doctor says, oh, yeah, you're one of my patients, aren't you? And you say, yes. And you say, actually, doctor, it's really helpful that I've seen you today because I have been feeling really bad for a while. And you start describing your symptoms. Now, the good news is the doctor is not going to ask you to take off your clothes, put them on the pavement, and start examining you in public. Partly because it would be very, very unprofessional, partly because it would alarm passers-by who'd probably call the police, and partly because the doctor has none of his equipment with him, so it can't happen. But maybe the doctor can say to you, okay, ask you a few questions, check your temperature, feel your pulse, listen to your heartbeat, listen to your breathing, maybe ask you to open your mouth and go, ah. And based on those fairly limited tests, the doctor is likely to say something like, well, I can't see anything wrong with you. Notice they don't sound so confident anymore, but then of course they've not checked so much. So when they give their opinion, they're not going to say you are okay or you are not okay. They're either going to say, well, I can't see any problem, or there might be a problem, but I don't know. They're going to hedge their bets, in other words, because they don't know. So when we have less detailed testing, meaning you are less confident in your opinion being correct, you can still give some assurance, because if your doctor says to you, I can't see anything wrong, I mean, that's better than being told you're about to die, isn't it? I mean, you're getting some assurance you're okay, but now you are getting low level. And notice that when we had high level assurance, the opinion was given in relatively positive terms. In my opinion, you're okay. In my opinion, you're not okay. So up here, we call this positive assurance, because you are relatively positive in your opinion. And with low level assurance, it's called negative. And it's called negative because of the words you use. Instead of saying things are right, we say, I didn't see that they were wrong. So it's the fact that you're using the word cannot, yeah, not negative. It's a bit like if you come to me and say, Paul, am I attractive? If I say yes, that's positive assurance. If I say no, that's positive assurance as well, because I sound fairly sure. If you come to me and say, Paul, am I attractive? And I say, well, you're not ugly. That's negative assurance. It's still good that you're not ugly, but you really would have liked to hear, yes, you're attractive. So it's a lower level of confidence. Now, hopefully that all made a bit of sense. You remember I said before the chapter that this is the one thing in here that is useful if you actually understand it, not just know it. And the reason for that is this. An external audit requires detailed testing because the law says we have to, and therefore external audit will be high level assurance. And with an external audit, it has a special name. It's called reasonable assurance. So it's high level, but not perfect. The law and audit standards require us to do such levels of detailed testing that by the end of the audit we are required to be able to say the accounts are okay or they're not. High level assurance. You remember earlier I said that another engagement you might be asked to do is to check cash flow forecasts. Well, if you're checking cash flow forecasts, well, forecasts are estimates of the future, and because they are estimates of the future, they're not facts from the past, there are limits as to how much checking you can do. Whoops. This is known as a review assignment. It is less detailed than an audit, so less detailed testing is done. The reason why it's less detailed, well, that will vary, but it could be because if there is no law forcing detailed testing, and the client does not have the time or money, oops, sorry about that, to pay for detail, then it won't be detailed. But the reason why my example of checking cash flow forecasts is likely to be less detailed than an audit is because if you're checking estimates, there's a lot less evidence to back up the numbers because they're guesses, they're not real. So as long as you understand all of that, you are covered in understanding the concept of assurance. It is giving confidence. Sometimes we can give a lot of confidence because a client wants a lot, they want to pay a lot for it, they're willing to wait for it, or because the law says they have to require a lot of confidence. And sometimes clients pay us smaller amounts of money to give lower levels of confidence because there's no rules forcing them to go for higher. They don't want to pay for higher, so why bother? And that is positive assurance, negative assurance. Make sure you are happy with that. You don't just know it, you understand it. So the external audit is relatively high level assurance, and for auditing it's got its own technical term called reasonable assurance, which is high but not 100%. So that's one of the two concepts on the page that I said were important. And the other one is true and fair. Now, I've said that external auditors have a job to check whether the published financial statements are somewhere close to correct. We are not going to check that they are 100% accurate. So when I say these figures are true, I don't mean perfectly. What I mean is that they are not materially wrong. So now we've got another technical term. What do we mean by materially? Well, I'll come on to that in a minute. So, not materially wrong. When we say the accounts are fair, we mean they have been produced without any bias. In other words, produced with no outside factors affecting the figures. So let me give you an example of what I mean. I'll answer that question in a minute, Sheriar, okay? What do we mean by outside factors? Well, when the directors are producing the accounts, what they should be doing is following accounting rules, making sure the true nature of the business transactions is being shown in the numbers. But a lot of company directors get a bonus, and a lot of those bonuses are partly based on the company's profits. There is therefore a danger that when working out the numbers to put in the accounts, the directors are thinking about maximising their bonuses instead of reflecting the truth. Fairness is where you push the bonuses to one side and just focus on the transactions and the rules. Now, a question, absolute assurance. Absolute assurance means a 100% guarantee. So if you said to me, Paul, how confident are you that 1 + 1 is 2? I am 100% confident that using the numbering system we do in the human race, that 1 + 1 is 2. I am totally convinced. If you said, Paul, are you absolutely confident your tie is red? I would say, yes, this is definitely a red tie. Now, you can only be 100% confident about those things which are pure fact, because then there's no way of challenging them. And that actually is a beautifully timed question, because we need to understand why it is that auditors cannot be 100% sure, and why auditors say the accounts are true and fair instead of saying the accounts are right. So why do we use this true and fair? Why can't we just use normal words like the accounts are right? Why not absolute assurance? Well, there are numerous reasons for this, and two in particular spring to mind. Number one, it is physically impossible to test everything. When I lived in Singapore, I travelled around there a bit, and one of the places I spent a lot of time was Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And you may be aware that until the recent growth in building very big buildings, the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, which are twin towers, were just about the tallest building in the world for a while. And because there are two towers, you can imagine there are a lot of windows. And I learned when I was out there that apparently there's a team of people who clean the windows, and they start at the top and work their way down to the bottom, and by the time they've finished, it's time to go straight back up to the top and do the whole thing again. It takes months to clean all the windows because there are so many of them. The problem with doing that is I would imagine by the time they get to the bottom, the windows at the top are getting dirty again. But there's a limit to what you can do in the time available. The problem with auditing is that every year you've got to audit and give an opinion on the accounts. Imagine if you were auditing McDonald's. I mean, how many cheeseburgers do they sell? You can't check every single sales transaction going through every single till. It's physically impossible. So we can't check everything, and if you can't check everything, you can't be absolutely sure the accounts are right, and you can't say the accounts are right. The best you can do is say they're not materially wrong. They're not wrong in any way that would actually matter. I'll explain more shortly. And there's a second reason why we can't say the accounts are right. And that is that a lot of numbers in financial statements are not facts. They are instead estimates. And estimates cannot be right or wrong, because they're estimates. They're a best guess. Examples, provisions are an estimate of a future amount the company will pay because of an obligation they have now. Depreciation is an estimate based on taking the cost of an asset and spreading it over its estimated useful economic life. Well, how do you know how long that asset will last? Best you can do is guess. There's no guarantees it will last that long. So because of those two things and a few other things as well, auditors cannot say we are 100% sure that these accounts are totally right. You can't do it. We are reasonably assured that the financial statements are true and fair. Now, I've introduced there the concept of materiality. And there's sort of a clue in the word here. We'll see more about materiality in detail in chapter number 3. But look at the word materiality. What does it begin with? Matter. A mistake is material if shareholders think it matters. In other words, they care. Let me give you a little illustration to prove my point. There is a company in the UK called Tesco's. They are the biggest supermarket chain in the UK, and they are really big. Now, this is not quite the exactly right answer, but here is their sales revenue from a couple of years ago. £67 billion. 249,137,156p. Pounds, sorry, not p. So, let's play a little game. Let us imagine that we are the auditors of Tesco's. We are about to start our audit work. We've been handed the draft accounts by Tesco's finance director. We open them up, and at the top of the statement of profit or loss, it says sales revenue, and then that number is there. And we start to talk about how we're going to check this number out, when into the audit room walks the company's finance director and says, "Stop!" And we say, "What's the problem?" And he says, "I am most awfully sorry. There is a mistake in the draft accounts. Give them back and I'll correct it." And you hand them back and he says, "Actually, it's in the sales figure. I am so sorry about this, but that 6 should have been a 5. Do you care? No. Should the finance director care? Well, clearly he's a perfectionist, so well done. But do we think the shareholders care if instead of it being 67,249,137,156, it is in fact 67,249,137,155? £1 mistake out of 67 billion. Does anyone care? No. £1 doesn't matter. But then, of course, that raises the interesting question. If a few minutes later the finance director comes back in and says, "Actually, that one is a 4, do you care that the accounts are now out by £10? And the answer, of course, is out of 67 billion, £10? No. So no one cares. No one cares. Which then raises the interesting question, yeah, but what if we then change that to a 2? Would £100 be of importance? And if the answer to that is no, at what point do we start to care? I mean, 10,000? 100,000? A million? 10 million? 100 million? There must be some point in there where shareholders go, "Whoa, that's a big mistake." And that is what materiality attempts to do, to guide the auditor as to when the shareholders are likely to care. Why do we need to do this? Well, the reason we have to do this is that the auditor is a bit like a fisherman. And when fishermen go out to fish, they have to decide which nets to take with them. And if you want to catch big fish only, you take nets with big holes so that all the little fish that you don't care about go through the holes and don't get in your way. If you want to catch little fish, then the nets will have tiny holes in to stop the little fish escaping. As an auditor, you are fishing for mistakes in the accounts. What you're trying to do is decide at the beginning how big in your auditing fishing net should the holes be. So auditors have got to design their tests to try to ensure that material mistakes get detected. So at the start of an audit, we've got to try and work out what materiality might be, because that will affect the work we're going to plan to do. Now, it's a little early to get into this level of detail, but maybe this will be a little surprise as we get to the end of our first class. If you were auditing Tesco's, or in fact any other company, and you were looking at their sales revenue figure, at what point would you start to think that mistake would matter? Well, this is likely to surprise you a bit. But one commonly used calculation for materiality is 1% of revenue, which for Tesco's would therefore be £672 million. So am I saying that shareholders don't care if Tesco's sales revenue is wrong by 500 million, £500 million? And oddly, the answer is, well, I'm not sure they do care that much. I mean, if you think about it like this, the figure I just wrote up there was 67.3, sorry, no it wasn't, it was 67.2 billion. If I then told you there was another supermarket who had revenues of 67.1 billion, would you say those are two different size supermarkets, or would you say, no, they're pretty much the same? You'd say they're the same, wouldn't you? When you're talking about 67 billion, 0.5 billion is just not that big a number. Now, don't get me wrong. As an auditor, if I discover that someone is stealing 500 million a year from Tesco's, I will tell them, and Tesco's will prosecute. The point is that I will design my audit tests to spot mistakes of 670 million and upwards. I'll still catch some smaller fish, don't you worry, they'll still end up in the net. But it does mean that if you worked at Tesco's, you would probably get away with stealing 10 million, 20 million a year, because you would be flying under the radar of the people checking the numbers. Scary thought. But it's one of the reasons why so many people in business make themselves very rich by being criminals. It's because the people who are checking are not checking at the same level of detail you might think they are. Ooh, interesting. More on materiality coming up in chapter number 3. Okay, we're nearing the end of this, so I'm not going to do too much more. Objectives of an assurance engagement is to give confidence and opinion. We've done that already. Last thing I think I'll do today is this, the 5 elements of an assurance engagement. This is something you just need to know. It's pure knowledge, so make sure you know it. To help you know it, I'll explain it as we go through. So, right, so 5 different areas in an assurance engagement. Number 1, we need a subject matter, and for an audit, that equals the truth and fairness of the financial statements. I'll come back to the 3 main parties in a minute. We need a report, and with an audit, that's easy. That's the audit opinion at the end of the process. Standards, when you are providing assurance, you are saying to someone, in my opinion, they've done something right. Well, in terms of accounts, that means the standards are going to be the accounting standards, IAS, IFRS. And the evidence in an audit that allows you to give an opinion will be things like documentation, explanations from the company's management, things like that, recalculations, will all help you to give evidence in order for you to provide reasonable assurance. Now the one thing I need to do with you was the second point on that list. So the three main parties, just to assure you, we've done positive and negative assurance already, so we're covered on that. Let's just go off to a separate page and look at the three parties in an assurance engagement. And again, we'll use the external audit as our example. With external auditing, there are three parties. There are directors, there are shareholders, and there are the external auditors. And it works like this. The idea is that directors are responsible to the shareholders for producing true and fair financial statements. But the shareholders don't trust them. It's this agency issue, isn't it? So the external auditors are going to provide assurance to the shareholders in a report, and in order to do that, the auditors are going to have to check how the directors produce the accounts. And that is how all assurance engagements work. Someone is responsible to someone else. The person who has this responsibility owed to them wants some confidence that the responsible people have done their work properly, so they hire some people to provide assurance. So the shareholders hire the auditors and the auditors provide the assurance. And that's how it works. Now, as far as the class notes are concerned, there's not much on the next page or so, so I'll just cover this to finish off actually. I've already told you what statutory audit is. It's the external audit, same thing. So we know what that does. In order to be an auditor, you have to register with an auditing body, one of which is the ACCA, by the way. So if you pass the ACCA's exams, get some practical experience, then you can become a registered auditor. And auditors follow standards as I highlighted earlier, and they're called ISAs. Be careful, don't get the ISAs, the audit standards, mucked up with the IASs, the accounting standards. Audit work is monitored. That's a mixture of the ACCA and government, checking the work that auditors do to make sure the quality levels are there. The rules on who appoints auditors, who gets rid of auditors, there's an introduction here, but you'll see this in more detail in Chapter 2, so we'll leave it until then. Value and limitations. Well, the value is giving credibility, in other words, assurance. And the main limitations, well, that's the main one. As an auditor, most of the evidence you want is inside the company, which means you need the directors to hand it to you. It's like investigating a murderer when the murderer has got the fingerprints and the murderer has still got the weapon. It makes life so difficult. So, as I said, on the next page, auditors follow ISAs. We'll be seeing those throughout the course. And then the notes go on to look at corporate governance. And that is the point at which today I'm going to stop. So, in this first class, I spent a lot of time looking at the nature of this exam and importantly how we're going to study it and how we're going to get good at it, how we're going to approach the questions. I don't normally set much in the way of homework on day one, but there are a couple of things I'd like you to do. Make sure you're comfortable with what I said at the beginning, and also go back over the assurance stuff we've just done in Chapter 1, because it's useful for the rest of the course if you understand how that works. And to answer your question, I would also like you to read, don't try and learn it, just read it and get a flavour of it. Pages 13 to the top of page 19. Because corporate governance is an area where, as long as you know it, it's fine. It doesn't come up very often, and there's quite a lot of detail in there. And I find it a lot easier to summarise what you have to know in class if I've given you the chance to have a read through it first. I will be covering it, don't worry. But just to help class number 2, if you could have a little brief read, just 10 minutes will be enough. Read through pages 13 to 19, and that will give me something to build on and start with in our next class. Well, there we go. Class 1 down, 7 to go. Thank you all very much for your participation. I will see you in 1 week's time when we will do class number 2. Same time, same place. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'll see you there. Thank you very much.